In Colombia, several groups continue street demonstrations, ignoring the call for a temporary suspension of mobilizations made by the National Strike Committee. Nicaragua faces international pressure, especially from the United States, ahead of next presidential elections in November. The People's Democratic Republic of Korea's President Kim Jong-Un warns North Koreans must be prepared for conflicts, as much as for dialogue with the United States. From the headquarters of TeleSUR English in Havana, Cuba, this is From the South. I'm Gladys Quesada. Now we begin with the news. In Colombia, several groups have defied the National Strike Committee's temporary suspension of street demonstrations. One person was reported dead in Cali. At least one protester dead, 20 wounded, and 8 arrested was the balance of repression in Cali, in southwestern Colombia, one of the epicenters of protest. Although street demonstrations were temporarily suspended by the strike committee, several groups ignored the call in Cali, Bogotá, Neiva, and other places, putting up barricades and marches. All met with the usual brutality of President Duque's anti-riot police units. The Colombian Senate passed a series of bills, none of which take into account the demands made by the population during the national strike mobilizations. The reform of the disciplinary code of the Attorney General's office, the Energy Transition Bill, and the reform of the organic statute of Bogotá were approved. The bill to reduce the working day is still under discussion. With regard to the reform of the disciplinary code of the Attorney General's office, this authority is granted jurisdictional and judicial police powers. In addition, the President of the Republic is granted extraordinary powers to increase the staff of this entity by up to 500 people. Meanwhile, the Colombian people continue on the streets, demanding real change and legislation that addresses their urgent needs. The World Bank refuses to help El Salvador in implementing Bitcoin as parallel official currency. A World Bank spokesperson confirmed that the Salvadoran government had approached the institution for help on Bitcoin. This is not something the World Bank can support given the environmental and transparency shortcomings, he said. Also, the International Monetary Fund had criticized the adoption of cryptocurrencies as legal tender for raising macroeconomic issues. On June 9th, the Central American country became the first in the world to adopt Bitcoin as legal currency. The government of President Nayib Bukele has said it does not plan to replace the current official currency, the US dollar. The Bitcoin poses a threat to existing financial structures controlled by international banks. Patricia Guevara is a Mexican woman used to diesel and wrenches. She, along with family members that spread 4 generations of women, runs an auto repair shop called Taller, or Workshop Chief, in Mexico City. Patricia and her family defy stereotypes in a society where women's rights demands have become more persistent under hostile context. Amid a new wave of activist movement and gender equality campaigns, the story of Patricia stands out as a proud female mechanic. She inherited the shop after her father died and since then works with 15 women of her kin, mainly focused on tire and rim repair.
My father, who founded this workshop, had a lot of problems with male employees. They would go out drinking and sometimes failed to show up for work. So he wanted to hire women because he believed they were more responsible.
It's a shame that there are those who think it's strange that women are working here. These days, we must recognize that women can do anything that men can. So I was delighted to hear about this place.
If you want it, you can do it. No one can place limits on what you can do. Your ability, your intelligence. You alone can define that.
Excellent story. A rival gunfight among inmates of maximum security prison in Honduras left at least 5 people dead. Members of the rival street gangs Barrio 18 and Mara Salvatrucha held a gunfight in La Tolva prison, east of the capital Tegucigalpa. A spokesperson for the Justice Ministry, Yuri Mora, admitted that prison guards could not even dream of intervening. He said that forensics came afterward to pick up the bodies and launch the ritual investigation. Barrio 18 and Mara Salvatrucha gangs control large urban areas and even rural areas. Territorial disputes for drug trafficking, weapons, auto theft, and other businesses are common. They also control, it seems, the jails. On June 23rd, Cuba will present a draft resolution demanding an end to the U.S. blockade that the island is suffering for over 6 decades. TeleSUR English joins the plea and presents you the next material from the Cuban Foreign Affairs Ministry. Let's watch.
El próximo 23 de junio, la Asamblea General de las Naciones Unidas considerará nuevamente el proyecto de resolución que reclama poner fin al bloqueo contra Cuba. La política de rendir al pueblo cubano por hambre, penuria y desesperación dura ya más de 6 décadas y constituye una violación masiva de los derechos humanos. El presidente Donald Trump escaló la guerra económica a un nivel extremo e incorporó 243 medidas coercitivas que el gobierno del presidente Joe Biden mantiene hoy vigentes. El bloqueo es una política cruel que provoca sufrimiento, privaciones y carencias a las familias cubanas. Se ha endurecido deliberadamente durante la pandemia de COVID-19. Dificulta el acceso a medicamentos, abastecimientos y equipos necesarios. Es un acto de genocidio. Obstaculiza los vínculos familiares y restringe aún más la libertad de viajar de los estadounidenses. Su aplicación extraterritorial reduce drásticamente nuestros ingresos y dificulta el desarrollo. Una superpotencia acosa a una pequeña isla y la obliga a luchar contra una terrible pandemia y contra un bloqueo que infligen daños humanos y económicos. Como el virus que provoca esta pandemia, el bloqueo de Estados Unidos asfixia y daña a las familias cubanas.
And we'll be right back after this very short break, so don't go away. Welcome back. Nicaragua is 5 months away from holding presidential elections. The country is under international pressure, and the United States is trying to interfere in its internal affairs by financing opposition groups seeking to destabilize the country, authorities said. More in this report by TeleSUR correspondent Maria Jose Diaz.
Development of peace by supporting our projects that are already in place and that we cannot throw away for someone else to come and finish.
At the end of 2020, the Defense of the Rights of the Peoples to Independence, Sovereignty and Self-Determination for Peace Act was approved, a law that Nicaraguan authorities point out has been violated by opposition sectors that, despite promoting a smear campaign against the country's institutions, are getting ready for the next electoral process. In this alliance, we are firmly determined to select a presidential candidate with capacity, who generates confidence in the citizens, and we will not give up this objective. Political expert Freddy Franco explains that the most recent legal actions of the Nicaraguan authorities towards opposition sectors should be understood as an effort to defend national sovereignty in the context of the ongoing United States campaign to interfere in the country's internal affairs and destabilize it by financing opposition sectors in an attempt to oust the constitutional government of President Daniel Ortega.
The people and institutions that are being prosecuted in Nicaragua are being prosecuted because they have committed crimes. They have used that money for purposes other than those established by law. They have even hidden money. They have laundered money, and indeed you know that not only in Nicaragua, but at the international level there are laws. Strong international legislations that fight organized crime, drug trafficking, money laundering, a series of crimes that affect international economic relations and the security of institutions and states.
According to recent investigations, The United States Agency for International Development allocated $5.2 million in 2017 to opposition groups in Nicaragua, which only 1 year later actively participated in the coup attempt of 2018.
María José Díaz, TeleSUR, Nicaragua.
The President of the UN General Assembly convened a high-level meeting on middle-income countries on Thursday. Home to 62% of the world's poor, many middle-income countries face crippling debt and a lack of economic competitiveness. As part of the meeting held under the theme Fine-Tuning the Development System Approach to Address the Needs of Middle-Income Countries, UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres called for innovative instruments to allow debt restructuring, stressing that meaningful debt reduction can help middle-income countries expand their fiscal scale to boost investment and zero resilient and sustainable recovery from the current crisis. Participants discussed the gaps and challenges facing these nations in the implementation of the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development, addressing the current socio-economic fallout from the pandemic and how it has aggravated existing vulnerabilities.
As we move to accelerate progress on the Sustainable Development Goals in this decade of action, removing the barriers to progress in middle-income countries is a sure way to expedite and deepen success. With 75% of the world's population and 62% of the world's poor, middle-income countries constitute an economic powerhouse that, if unleashed, can boost global economic growth, enhance trade, and support the development of new and innovative sectors. This will not only help alleviate poverty in middle-income countries themselves, but support growth the world over. This is a win-win for all involved.
COVID-19 and the disruptions in global trade has exposed and exacerbated the economic, social and environmental vulnerabilities of many middle-income countries. And in many, it has also amplified structural challenges such as limited healthcare capacities, inadequate education systems, and limitations in public administration. We have to use this moment to build resilience for the future.
Brazil keeps facing critical numbers in the coronavirus pandemic. An average of 60,000 new cases a day has been recorded since April. Only on Thursday, 74,000 people tested positive. A current total of 496,000 deaths makes Brazil the world's second highest in fatalities, only after the United States. 11% of the population has been vaccinated, while the health system struggles with hospitals at full capacity in 25 of the 27 Brazilian states since March, according to the Fiocruz, the country's main health institute. The new spike fluctuates between 60 and 90,000 daily new cases in June. President Jair Bolsonaro is facing a congressional investigation for his handling of the pandemic, which up until recently he had been denying. And we go now to Spain, where the legal requirement to wear masks outdoors will be lifted on June 26. Prime Minister Pedro Sánchez stated that the matter will be sorted out by the cabinet next Thursday.
I would like to tell you that we are going to hold an extraordinary Council of Ministers meeting next Thursday, and that we are going to propose to Spanish society not to make it compulsory to wear a mask outdoors from Saturday, 26 June.
And we have more stories coming up after this final short break, so stay with us. Welcome back to From the South. North Koreans must be prepared for conflict as much as for dialogue with the United States, warned the People's Democratic Republic of Korea's President Kim Jong-Un. Kim's remarks were given to a Central Committee meeting of the ruling Korean Workers' Party. He was responding to United States President Joe Biden's stated initiative to resume dialogue with Pyongyang on nuclear arms control. The U.S. newly appointed envoy for North Korea, Sung Kim, started this Friday a week-long trip to South Korea and Japan to coordinate possible talks with Kim Jong-un's government. Presidential elections are underway in the Islamic Republic of Iran. 5 candidates are disputing the seat of head of state. Some 60 million Iranians are eligible to vote. From the early hours of voting, long queues were formed outside polling stations, thus dismissing Western mainstream media speculations of a low turnout and widespread apathy among voters. Ibrahim Raisi, the country's current judiciary chief, looks poised to emerge as winner, having shown a 57% of preferences in pre-election opinion polls. Incumbent President Hassan Rouhani was one of the first to cast his vote.
People know how important these elections are for the country, for their own fate, and for the Islamic Republic ruling system.
And protests continue in Lebanon after Thursday's general strike as the Lebanese pound reaches new lows against the US dollar. The economic crisis in the country continues to worsen. Lebanon has not had a government for more than 10 months, and in the absence of an economic recovery plan, the fuel, electricity, and medicines are now in short supply. In this context, the population continues on the streets in demand for solutions to the crisis the country is going through. The international community has conditioned the sending of economic aid to the formation of a new government, but the local politicians failed to reach an agreement for the formation of a cabinet. Ivory Coast's former president Laurent Gbagbo returns to his country after being acquitted by the International Criminal Court of charges of crimes against humanity. Gbagbo spent 10 years in jail during the trial. Gbagbo was accused of crimes against humanity after his refusal to accept electoral defeat in 2010, a vote he had postponed 6 times, triggering a wave of violence that cost some 3,000 lives. The Hague-based International Court will not approve Gbagbo's responsibility for the killings, but he had spent 10 years behind bars anyway. The winner of the 2010 election was precisely the man who now welcomed his former foe back home, President Alassane Ouattara. He did that for the sake of reconciliation, he said. With 72-year-old Gbagbo being greeted on arrival by crowds at the airport and streets of Abidjan, it remains to be seen how long that reconciliation will last. Women and children are among the main victims of the terrorist war imposed on Syria for more than 10 years. In order to alleviate the suffering and address the problems of this sector of Syrian society, the authorities are using every means at their disposal, including art. More in the following report from our correspondent, Hisham Wanos.
The National Museum of Damascus is hosting an exhibition of artists and visual art students that illustrates the impact of war on the lives of Syrian children. The works on display, of different types, styles, and techniques, embody the social problem of minors who have been forced to work and express the hope for an early solution that will give them back their childhood dreams stolen by terrorism and its sponsors.
My paintings reflect the situation of children who, due to the war, lost their parents and were forced to work to survive. And my idea is to make people aware of this tragic reality of children who lost their childhood. Working children represents a hard reality of lost childhood, and our picture reflects this social problem with the aim of mobilizing society to intensify the efforts to reduce the spread of this phenomenon.
This exhibition is part of the official plan to help children affected by the war, because art is one of the tools we use to solve the problems of society, including the problem of working children that we exhibit here in the paintings of visual artists.
In parallel, the Khan Assad Basha Caravanserai in the old city of Damascus is hosting the annual Spring 2021 exhibition. The works on display were devoted on this occasion to reflecting on the themes of women, war, and human emotions. the suffering of women refugees due to the cold and difficult living conditions, as well as the psychological state of breast cancer patients, were among the main issues that the artists expressed in their paintings exhibited at the event.
Through this exhibition, the artists contribute with their paintings to express the reality of the current situation in the country in the midst of war and blockade, and in particular on this occasion the suffering of Syrian women, and at the same time this joint exhibition allows us to present our idea as a youth layer.
Art, in its different forms, is one of the many tools used by the government and citizens of Syria to overcome the ravages of war, a civilized practice that has its roots in the millennial cultural history of the Syrian people, distant from the terrorism that ravages their country.
TeleSUR, Damascus, Syria.
And we have come to the end of this news brief. But remember, you can find this and many other stories on our website at telesurenglish.net. And also, if you feel so inclined, please join us on social media. We are on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and Telegram. For TeleSUR English, I'm Gladys Quesada. Thank you for watching.